Hello and welcome to question and answer number 32. I have answered so many questions and I'm going to answer more today. And as a change of pace from sitting back in the office with the bookcase and the altar and all that, I'm sitting out on the back porch on a coldish, windy day because it's been raining a lot. And I'm more or less recovered from our big vacation last week. And so I'm going to start answering questions. And the first question is from Robert. And Robert says, I had a question, but I forgot what it was. But then he continues. And he says, so I have another one. What is Buddhist take on dementia or Alzheimer's disease? How can one produce karma if one doesn't remember anything? Well, as far as I remember, the Buddhist suttas and also the monastic discipline doesn't really have a whole lot to say about dementia, which, I mean, of course it doesn't mention Alzheimer's disease because that's like a new name for something, but I mean, it just takes it for granted that as you get older, your mind is going to go to more or less of a, to some degree. There's very few people that when they're in their 90s, if they live that long, are still sharp as a tack. Maybe somebody like Bertrand Russell. I mean, he was still going to jail and writing books and stuff when he was in his 90s. But so I guess I'm going to emphasize the last part of this question, which is how can one produce karma if one doesn't remember anything? And the main thing to remember about karma is that it is volition. And so it doesn't really rely on conscious memory. It relies more on subconscious memory or force of habit. And even a person with late stage Alzheimer's will still have like mental habits. Their mind will be degenerating, their short-term memory may be gone, their long-term memory may be going, but still they've got just a mental force of habit that's keeping them in operation to some degree, to a much less degree than when they were 30, but still. So it's like your karma is like the momentum of your mental states, and even though the momentum may be very much like limited, still it's still happening. And the more you just automatically do something just through force of habit, it reinforces the habit, it reinforces the karma. So animals also produce karma, even though they really don't have nearly as developed a memory as we humans do. And we humans, I mean, we grotesquely overestimate our own power of remembering things. I mean, it's like how many people can remember their locker combinations when they were in middle school or some such. It's like, can you remember the license plate numbers of every car you've owned or every phone number you've ever had? We forget a lot of things. And if the camera's bouncing around a little bit, it's because there's this dog right here. See? There she is. She's wanting attention and stuff. She's very nice. But let's get back to the question here. How can one produce karma if one doesn't remember anything? Yeah, the karma remembers. It's just this momentum of mental states. And so that happens regardless of any kind of conscious memory, because it just doesn't work that way. And I hope I answered that question before being totally distracted by the dog. So let's see. I guess I'll just move on to the next question. Sorry, Robert, if I didn't fully answer the question. But again, karma is the momentum of your mental states, and when you do have Alzheimer's or dementia, or you're just getting old and kind of losing your sharpness and so forth, it's it's more constricted, I suppose, but also it may be that you're just more locked into just habitual actions. Your so-called free will is less in play, and that means you're just driven by karma and just reinforcing karma. So it's not good. I mean, to have Alzheimer's disease is not a good substitute for enlightenment. So I'll just move on to the next question here, which is from Joe Doe. And Joe Doe says, What's your thoughts on the direct aerosol injection on the false premise and guise of stratospheric geoengineering, poison air raids taking place across the West, the rat poison, insecticides in the drinking supply, immigration to systematic replacement, drug mandates for babies, and forced inoculation? As a Buddhist monk, what's the best course of action? Get nailed like Christ or whoop ass like Krishna, Odin, and Zeus? Thanks. Well, um, the first part of this question is just naming a lot of things that is just like corrupt, ruthless governments that don't give a damn about the citizens of their countries are just messing with people. And stop chewing on that. Stop chewing on it. Dog was chewing on something. So, with regard to the whole first part, I mean, these are like modern problems or postmodern problems, but I mean, in the Buddhist time, things were at least as bad. I mean, you had sociopathic kings invading neighboring countries all the time. Like on the standard list of the 10 dangers that can, for example, interrupt a Buddhist ceremony or some such, number one on the list is kings, which means either a king preying on his own subjects or some foreign king preying on your king's subjects, which is you. So, and then of course you had like bandits, infesting the forest. You had diseases that they didn't have cures for, just plagues and so forth. It was gnarly. So it's always been messed up. And the Buddhist solution, the best course of action, as Jodo puts it, really is not getting nailed up like Christ or whooping ass like Krishna. I mean, you just opt out of the system. I mean, that's obviously what a serious Buddhist practitioner is supposed to do. He renounces the world and goes off into the forest and gets away from the whole shit show. Because the shit show can get you all tangled up in samsara even more than just living a quiet life in a hut with, a wife and kids and, dogs and the geese and the crops and all that. I mean, even that, you're going to have karmic attachments and entanglements and so forth. And I mean, even just living alone in a cave, you're going to have complications and, but to renounce the world, go off alone into a forest, just radical renunciation, that at least keeps it down to a minimum for someone who is relatively spiritually developed. I mean, if you lack the wisdom or maturity to live alone in a forest without cracking up, of course, it's just going to make things worse. But the answer to this question is you renounce the world, go off and live in a forest somewhere, and just opt out of the whole crazy system because it's always been crazy. It's not just that the modern globalist world has gone insane, it has always been insane. There's new kinds of insanity, I suppose, but I mean, it's still just the same kind of mess, just the human condition. So I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Fred. And Fred says, the question is, are arahants happy? So for those of you who are not well versed in Theravada Buddhist philosophy, an arahant is a fully enlightened being. And the answer would be yes, but it's not the kind of happy that it's not like a normie kind of happy. I mean, they're not like, giggling and singing and dancing and skipping around and big grins on their face all the time. They're just serene. It's just serenity, contentment. That's the kind of happiness they have. It's sort of neutral. It doesn't really have an opposite. It's neither positive nor negative, because if you have positive, you're going to have negative. If you have negative, you're going to have positive. And so you wind up with the roller coaster ride. And so they just go for like radical neutrality. And that in itself is the best and most reliable kind of happiness. And it's not boredom or anything, because, that's obviously not contentment. So the question is, are arahants happy? Yeah, they have detached from all suffering and delusion. So if you want to call, just not associating or not identifying with any kind of pain or discomfort or unhappiness. It can still arise just through the force of nature taking its course. Even the Buddha got really sick at least a few times. I mean, they can still feel pain. They stub their toe, they're still going to feel pain. It's just that they don't attach to it. They're just detached. They don't identify with the mind-body system anymore. And that's the best kind of happiness there is, at least to a devout Buddhist. So the next question from Fred is, can rebirth really be stopped? And it's kind of a trick question. Like, one of the questions that the Buddha himself refused to answer was, what happens to a Buddha after he dies? And he just wouldn't answer it. And so it's like you're going off the scale more than stopping rebirth. I mean, I could imagine that there could still be rebirth. I mean, this is heresy. This is not what Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism teaches. I mean, Theravada Buddhism teaches that when you become enlightened, you just don't get born again. That's it. You're out of samsara. But I could imagine a kind of situation where an enlightened being could take rebirth, but they wouldn't be identified with it. I mean, they'd just be sort of empty. So whether you'd call that rebirth or not, I don't know. But I think it really devolves into paradox. When you get into the realm of enlightened beings, you're dealing with a kind of formless infinity that they have merged with, so to speak. And I mean, when you deal with infinity, there's always paradox. I mean, I could go into just just simple paradoxes, but it'd be too much of a digression, I guess. Just when you deal with infinity. When you deal with infinity, it's just, you can't work it out in your head anymore. It just doesn't make sense. So can rebirth really be stopped? Going with Orthodox Theravada Buddhism, yes, and that is the goal. You want to get out of the cycle of birth and death. But even if there is some kind of rebirth that arguably could take place, I mean, it would be just like an empty rebirth. There wouldn't be anybody there. If an arahant was, you're an arahant from birth, you could argue that there's really nobody there. There's nobody who is taking rebirth, really. So I guess that's probably confused you sufficiently that I can move on to the next question. And this is also from Fred, and he says, question, exclamation point. What glues us to corporeality? And I would probably say what glues us to corporeality is just force of habit more than anything. It's like karma. Yeah. Plus, I'm reminded of William Blake and his The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, talking about how, the corporeal senses are really, our connection to the infinite at this level of existence. I mean, if you're just through, whatever, like some cosmic lottery, you wind up in this version of reality, then you pretty much have to have a body in order to have a functioning mind, as far as I can tell. So, yeah, that is kind of an interesting and unusual question, though. So I'm just going to move on to Fred's fourth and last question, this is a good one. What is the difference between mano, citta, and vijnana? Those are three words that are found in Theravada Buddhist philosophy. Mano, or mana, means mind. It's usually translated as mind. Citta also is translated as mind, usually. It can also be translated as heart. The notorious Ken Wheeler translated it as soul. He's possibly the only person I know of who does that. But both mano and citta are usually translated as mind. If I were translating a text and I found mano or citta, yeah, I'd probably use the word mind. And now we've got dogs downstairs that are barking. Vijnana, on the other hand, is usually translated as consciousness. So that's different from, mind is sort of a general term which can include mental states. And usually mono and chitta, if they're used loosely in regular discourse, then that can just mean just the mentality portion of your system, the mind body system. Vijnana is more limited, and in Theravada Buddhism, it's like um, really in Orthodox Theravada Vijnana, they're not very good at explaining what bare consciousness is, because they're saying that it's ultimately different from mental states. I would say that consciousness is just sort of like the ground of your mind, and your mental states would be sort of like ripples in the the surface of the water, so to speak. Um, in Abhidhamma philosophy, chitta also means consciousness. So, according to Abhidhamma, chitta and vijnana are the same, and mental states would be called cetasika. So you've got in Abhidhamma philosophy four ultimate realities. You've got matter, you've got mind, you've got mental states, and then you've got nirvana or nibbana. So going with the Abhidhamma, chitta and vijnana would be synonyms. Mono, possibly. I don't remember. I mean, I haven't studied a whole lot of Abhidhamma, and I'm not sure if mono or mana is really a technical term in Abhidhamma philosophy. But yeah, all in all, the difference between mono, chitta, and vijnana is that mono and chitta just mean mind generally, and vijnana is more specific in meaning consciousness, although some philosophical texts will also use chitta as a technical term meaning consciousness itself, just bare consciousness, just separate from any mental states. And it's hard to explain that, especially if you're an Abhidhamma scholar. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Shithouse Rat. And Shithouse Rat says, are you familiar with the philosophy and teachings of Armenian mystic George Gurdjieff? And yeah, I've read a little bit about George Gurdjieff. Also, I read this weird science fiction novel called Barefoot in the Head, where there's this World War III is fought with like hallucinogenic aerosol bombs, and everyone's just loaded out of their mind. And there's this guy who was a disciple of Gurdjieff who becomes a kind of LSD messiah or something. But Gurdjieff, I mean, I'm not like Gurdjieffian. I haven't read any of his books from cover to cover. I've read a book by Uspensky, the Tertium Organum, that Uspensky was a disciple of Gurdjieff for a while. He refers to Gurdjieff several times. Now, I've read about Gurdjieff, and some things I like. Mainly, he was teaching just a kind of Buddhist mindfulness, a variation on standard Buddhist mindfulness. That was mainly what he was teaching. Although he had this certain ideas, like he would write his books in a very complicated, difficult style, because he felt that you had to work in order to earn higher knowledge. I mean, you really had to put work into it in order to really make it your own and like incorporate it into yourself in a functional way. And also, one of my favorite things about Gurdjieff is he felt that people need to be triggered. I mean, people need to be irritated. And so he had a kind of ashram in Europe somewhere, some kind of center where you go and, it's like you'd be given like a daily task or like a morning task, and it might be nothing more than just like wiping the leaves off of all the rose bushes. You just take a little cloth and you're like polishing the rose bush leaves, and you're supposed to do it mindfully. Just whatever you do, you're doing it contemplatively. You're right there in the moment. You're feeling all the sensations involved and so forth. But as I was saying, there was this Russian refugee. This was like after the Russian Revolution. So a lot of Russian aristocrats fled from Russia into Europe. And there was this one Russian refugee who was living at Gurdjieff's place, who was really difficult. He was just really fussy, just no sense of humor, just, and really he was just an irritant. He just did not get along with people, always complaining and so forth. And finally, some of Gurdjieff's followers, I mean, they would do practical jokes on him. And finally, they did some practical joke where they like stole his false teeth and rolled them in cow shit and then put them back on, where they found them. And he just left. I mean, the Russian guy just left in a fury. And Gurdjieff actually hunted him down. Oh, the dogs. There's two bitches in heat plus a male dog, and they're all having like an orgy down there. So Gurdjieff actually hunts this guy down and bribes him to come back because he wanted like just a chronic irritant there, just to give people an opportunity of dealing with their aversions, dealing with being triggered and so forth, which I think is a good idea. I kind of like that idea. Although nowadays, Dharma teachers or spiritual teachers have to be as bland and as gentle as possible, just so they won't offend, the dysfunctional leftists who attend these things. I mean, like a Zen master actually hit someone with a stick nowadays, he's going to wind up in jail or sued for millions of dollars or something. So that's pretty much all I know about Gurdjieff. He supposedly learned what he knew from some kind of masters, like, what was it, the Himalaya mountains or something. But really, it was sort of a westernized version of like Buddhist mindfulness, as far as I know. So I'll just move on to Shithouse Rat's next question. And I can't say this word for some reason. Shithouse Rat says, is there a sutra or text where the Buddha talks about the 4 different types of people: those who care neither for themselves nor others, those who care for themselves only, those who care for others only, and those who care for themselves and others? Well, it wouldn't surprise me if there was. I don't remember a text. It would probably be in the Anguttara Nikaya under the section of 4s. Like the Anguttara Nikaya is one of the main groups of Theravada Buddhist suttas that are organized by number. So you got the chapter 1, the chapter 2s, the chapter 3s, and then you get to the chapter 4, and the Buddha will talk about there are these 4 things, and it could be that that's in there. There are suttas that are like this, that are kind of similar, like the monk who let's see, what was I thinking of here? He it's similar to this. It's not exactly the same. It's like a monk who he practices in pain. Let's see. So, okay, there's one of the things is like spiritual development. Spiritual development can be rapid and painful. It can be slow and painful. It can be rapid and pleasurable, and it can be slow and pleasurable. So there's a sutta where the Buddha is talking about that, and there's lots of similar ones. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's one that Shithouse Rat here is asking about. But if you really want to know, I would suggest looking in the section on 4s in the Anguttara Nikaya, because that's where it would probably be if it does exist. Next question. Also from Shithouse Rat, which I must enunciate very carefully. And he says, merch when? I remember you selling a "to exist is to transgress" shirt. Actually, I did kind of design it, but I didn't really sell it. I sort of photoshopped a "to exist is to transgress" shirt. There's an artist in Liverpool who sent me a portrait of me, I assume, as a monk. And any of you who watch my videos and see the bookcase behind me, usually there's the portrait back there. Got a flying saucer flying over the top. There was a swastika on it too that got painted over. And he sent me 20 pounds sterling, which I still have in my wallet. I forgot to bring my wallet, or I'd show you. I've been carrying it around for over a year now. And he wanted me to make a shirt with that portrait on it. And yeah, I still have the 20, what do you say, 20 quid? I don't know slang, British slang. Um, so merch when, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, I'm not really into hyping myself. And I mean, I'm willing to do the videos. It's nice. I enjoy doing the videos. I'm not complaining. But like actually hyping myself. I've seen like there's this guy I watch on YouTube, Dr. Steve Turley, who is just shameless in his hyping of merch and just he's like a used car salesman, you know. Our prices are so low, they're insane. This kind of attitude. And I just can't do it. But I mean, if people really want something like that, it can happen. Yeah, to exist to just transgress is a good it's a good statement for a T-shirt, I think. Maybe even coffee mugs. I don't know. But I'm really not a business person. I just am not a business person. The only way I could have survived as a monk in the West is just to have some kind of business manager take care of everything, and I would just do my own thing, just write and meditate and so forth. So merch when, yeah, it's that's like a maybe. There's and maybe there'll be a when, but I mean, if people really want that kind of stuff, that's fine. We can work something out. So next question, last question from Shithouse Rat. Which Sutta Nipata translation would you recommend? That's a good question. There are several Sutta Nipata translations, and some are better than others. Um, my favorite, the one that I still have, is it's the Polytext Society translation of the Sutta Nipata with the main translation by K.R. Norman, and then there's alternate renderings by Walpola Rahula and I.B. Horner. So you get like three different possible interpretations. They agree on most of it, but you know there are some controversial uh, passages that can be interpreted in different ways. So that's good. There's an old one. I think it's by Lord Chalmers called Woven Cadences, which is all in poetry, which is nice because the original Sutta Nipata is mostly in poetry. So that's kind of nice too. It's good. Um, I'm pretty sure that Ajahn Tanisaro has translated it, and with regard to the renderings, I would say he's as good as any, although his style of translating verses is kind of cringy to me. I cringe when I see his translation of verses because it's like to compensate for the fact that he's not putting it in regular meter, he's just kind of positioning words more or less at random on the page, and you know because it seems artistic or something. So it's just kind of a distraction to me. Maybe Bhikkhu Bodhi has translated the Sutta Nipata. I'm not sure, but um, when I was a junior monk, my favorite part of not only the Sutta Nipata but of the entire Pali Tipitaka is the Atthaka Vagga, which is the fourth chapter of the Sutta Nipata. And I didn't see a translation that I really liked, so I just made my own translation. So chapter four, my favorite translation would be my own. Also, I do remember that there was a translation of the Sutta Nipata by a Sri Lankan monk with a name like Buddha Datta or something like that, and it sucked. Yeah, that's the only really bad translation I've come across is that. For example, the Kagawisana Sutta, which is the sutta on the rhinoceros horn, you know, go alone like the horn of the rhinoceros, is he translated it as unicorn for some reason, which is not so good. And you may have noticed there's somebody shooting guns in the background because we're in South Carolina. Gotta be ready. Gotta prep. So, yeah, which Sutta Nipata translation? The Polytext Society translation by K.R. Norman with the alternate renderings, and he's got another critical version of it without the alternate renderings, but with lots and lots of notes. So that would be good too. Or Ajahn Tanisaros, if you can be more patient than I am with his translation of verses. So the next question is from Rui. And Rui says, for the Putujana, can right view emerge from breath recollectedness? Apparently the Anapana Sutta was taught only to those who were already Sotapannas. So the question here is, if you don't have right view, can right view arise through meditation, and specifically on meditation on the breath? And I would say, with regard to the philosophical stuff, probably not. With regard to some things, maybe. Like, I mean, if you meditate, your wisdom is going to arise. It's like, sila leads to samadhi, which leads to panya. According to the standard, just the standard system of explaining how it works, how spiritual practice works. You purify your morals, which then causes your mind to become purified, which then causes your wisdom to become purified. And when your wisdom is completely purified, you're an enlightened being. And so you are going to increase in wisdom through meditation, although you may still be a heretic just because you're not saying exactly what the books say. Sometimes through meditation, not necessarily through meditation on the breath, but if you're getting into deep meditation where your thinking just stops, then really powerful, profound insights can arise from that. And you can get liberating insight, I assume, without having read a book, without having necessarily read Buddhist texts, if you're just meditating correctly. Like the Lesser Discourse on Voidness in the Majjhima Nikaya, one of my favorite suttas. The Buddha is talking about advancing and getting into deeper and deeper meditative states until you finally hit the signless concentration of mind. Animita Chito Samadhi, the signless concentration of mind, where it's supposedly, according to the commentaries, it's even beyond fourth jhana. It's just super advanced. It's like, according to the context of the sutta, it's like the highest possible attainable meditative state. And then when you come out of it, you realize even that had a beginning and an end, even that was conditioned, even that is not enlightenment. So the highest possible meditative state is still not enlightenment. And when you have that insight, it can just click and you just get knocked right out of the rut and you become enlightened. When you realize that nothing you can do through like deliberate effort is going to get you enlightened necessarily. That's it. It's just something just clicks. You just let go. You realize that it's all futile or some such, and then it winds up working, which is kind of ironic. So certain aspects of right view, including the most important aspects of right view, can emerge from breath recollectedness, but you're not going to get all of the technical philosophy stuff right through breath recollectedness. Just watching your breath isn't going to, make you aware of the Noble Eightfold Path and so forth. But you might get insights into like no self, or impermanence, or dukkha, like the three marks of existence. You might get deep insights into that. So I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Jeremy. And Jeremy says, have you read The Broken Buddha by S. Dhammika? What are your thoughts on that? Well, as it turns out, I did read Broken Buddha by S. Dhammika. I think I've got it stored in the guts of this computer, as a matter of fact. And I actually did a video on this book with Brian Rue. This was years ago when I was a monk. I might not have it on my channel, but if you go to Brian Rue's BitChute channel and go through the Buddhist Monk Truthers playlist, you may find it in there. That was fresh after I read Broken Buddha, so I had more to say about it than I do now. But Venerable Sravasti Dhammika, this is going to be politically incorrect, But Venerable Shrivasti Dhammaka is gay in kind of a stereotypically gay way, in that he's kind of catty and spiteful sometimes. And some of the books he has written are along this vein where he's just bashing away at orthodox Theravada Buddhism. And some of the stuff, I mean, some of his arguments are, I mean, there's some point to it. Like he's talking about how, um, like Asian monks are just lazy, which is largely true. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. But for example, he thinks that having to follow all the rules of monastic discipline is just ridiculous, but not following them strictly enough is also ridiculous. It's like there's a certain Goldilocks zone that he inhabits, I assume, that is the correct, the middle path of between strictness and excessive laxness. Also, he was praising in that book, like the new ultra liberal Western Buddhism, like spirit rock type Buddhism, spirit rockism, which I mean that was beyond the pale as far as I was concerned. Um, so yeah, I mean you might get some benefit from reading Broken Buddha, where he's mainly just bashing his own religion. Um, I mean, you can get some kind of insight into it, I suppose, but really, I don't think that he was doing it entirely in good faith. I'm pretty sure he wrote another book about Christianity called Beyond Belief, and he didn't use his monk name. I think he used his layman's name in that one. And he starts off with an intro saying, it is not my purpose to bash Buddhism or to bash Christianity. And then the whole rest of the book is just bashing Christianity. So he's just got this penchant for just sniping at others, apparently. At least that's the impression I get. I might be mistaken in that. So I think I'll just move on to the next question by Jeremy here. And Jeremy says, concerning Paticca Samuppada, the traditional interpretation according to the Abhidhamma and commentaries is 3 lifetimes, while some monks favor the moment-to-moment interpretation of the 12 links. One could also use 2 lifetimes or 1 lifetime for the 12 links. What do you think? So he's referring to dependent co-arising, or it has many different names, conditioned genesis. They're all attempted renderings of Paticca Samuppada, which means something like arising together, independence on. That would be like a very literal interpretation of the term Paticca Samuppada. And it has been condensed down. It was condensed down at a very early point in the development of Buddhist philosophy into what's called the 12 Nidana theory, which starts avijja, paccaya, avijja, paccaya, sankhara, I think. And there's just 12 links. And I won't go into the whole 12 links, but just this leads to that, which leads to that, which leads to that. And eventually you get to, Phassa is contact, which leads to Vedana, which is feeling, which leads to craving. And that's like the weak link. That's where the link between feeling and craving, that's where you're supposed to break the link and just break the whole cycle of samsara. And I've written about this before, I've talked about this before, but I do not think that the Buddha originally taught the 12 links. That there are proto-Paticca Samuppadas in the texts, like the central portion of the Sakapanya Sutta in the Digha Nikaya, which is very old. Also, there's the Kalaha Vivada Sutta in the Atthaka Vagga of the Sutta Nipata, which is also extremely old. And they've got the same kind of this leads to that, which leads to that, which leads to that. And it was the cobbling together of these, this leads to that, that resulted in these, the finalized 12 link theory. But even the Nidana Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, which is the longest discourse on the one subject of Paticca Samuppada, even that one is not orthodox, following the 12 links. So that one's maybe a little older. They hadn't finally worked out the whole 12 links yet. So I think it's academic to say whether it occurs in 3 lifetimes or 2 lifetimes or 1 lifetime, or whether it's all simultaneous, because I really don't think that the 12 Nidana theory of Paticca Samuppada is authentic. Or let's just say I'm skeptical of that. I think probably the older version is this being that is, this arising that arising. This not being that is not, this ceasing that ceases, which is another formula describing Paticca Samuppada, and I think that comes closer to the reality. And personally, I do think that it's simultaneous. Like the Sam in Samuppada, it's cognate to like the Latin con, C-O-N, or Greek sin, like S-Y-N in English letters, and it means with or together. So I think it's like this, it's all simultaneous. This whole universe, this whole world is just, everything is conditioning everything else. So it's like one of those tensegrity structures made by or designed by Buckminster Fuller. I think he's the one who designed them, where it's just like this weird miracle where the sticks in this figure are held together with elastic, so there's all pushing inwards, but they're not touching each other. It's somehow they're just sort of suspended, and each stick is like conditioning the position of all the other sticks. All the tension is like distributed throughout the thing, so that if you squish it flat, it just pops back into shape again. It's really nice. I was amazed by those first time I saw them. But I do think that it's like Schopenhauer wrote about causation. Like there's different kinds of causation, and one is just logical causation. Just I can't give a good example of it, but logical causation. I think that would be pretty much what dependent co-arising is. Just like it's all conditional. If you say that this exists, then you also have to say that that exists. It's like none of it is ultimately real. It's just this possibility that's just sort of making itself seem real by all the different possible conditional particles of it sort of reinforcing everything else. It's hard to explain. But getting back to the question here, with regard to the traditional interpretation, yeah, Orthodox Theravada says it's 3 lives, or you can just say past lives in general, the present life, and then future lives in general. Ajahn Punadamo told me that one not too long ago. So that's the Orthodox explanation, but my unorthodox explanation is it's all academic, because the 12 Nidana theory probably was cooked up sometime during the 100 years of just explosive growth of Buddhism before the first schism. And you can find all kinds of examples of proto Paticca Samuppadas in the Sutta Pitaka. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Christopher. And Christopher says, what robes do you like more, the original rags or the articulate design you explained? I think he's referring to the previous Q&A where I was talking about how monks' robes are supposed to be made, and why a t-shirt would not qualify as like an upper monk's robe. Why a monk's robe really has to be made according to this elaborate method of making robes. And really, it's hard to say which I like more, because the original rags are just extinct. Those haven't been around for maybe 1,000, 2,000 years. I knew this one monk in Burma, a Western monk. The Westerners tend to be more radical than the Asian ones. And he tried to make a robe out of just rags that he picked up off the ground. And that's the way monks' robes originally were in the Buddhist time. You just find rags on the ground, you pick them up, and you sew them together. But it didn't work very well. And people were complaining about his robes because, you find a black shirt, you're not going to be able to dye it like a yellowish brown color. It's going to stay black, purple, that kind of thing. So he just had this, it looked like clown clothes or something. And also, a problem with rags is you live in a fourth world country like Burma. People don't throw away their shirts until they're so far gone that it doesn't even look like a shirt anymore. Might be more holes than cloth. So the the way that it's made, they're made now. I mean, a kosher robe, a robe that's made according to the rules. It started off with the rags. Like you have to, um, when you connect two rags together, you tack them together first. That's called bandhana in Pali. Then you lay a strip of cloth over the seam, and then you sew the strip of cloth over the seam to reinforce the seam. Partly because the cloth sucked, and partly because thread sucked in those days. So it was made the same way. It's just that nowadays it's just sort of a relic. You know, it's kind of like vestigial because you're using good cloth that, I mean, you don't need to cut it up into little pieces and sew them back together again, but that's the way it's done. You get a big piece of cloth, you can't just wrap it around yourself. You have to cut it up into pieces and sew it back together again according to this way of, you know, like just stitching together, what is it, tacking together two pieces of cloth and then running a strip over the seam and then sewing the strip down to reinforce it. And then it's like the borders and everything are sewn in a certain way. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's the way of sewing it probably has not changed very much. It's just that the cloth itself has changed a lot, and most monks will just wear factory-made robes, even though the factory-made robes are not made according to the rules of monastic discipline. But sometimes on the label, like a Burmese monk's robes, you go to the monk paraphernalia store and buy a set of monk's robes to donate to a monk, and it might say, you know, made according to Vinaya, but no, they're not made according to Vinaya. So the original rags or the articulate design you explained. Well, the original rags were sewn according to the articulate design, so it's not so different than Christopher seems to have assumed. So I'll just move on to Christopher's second question. This is kind of a strange one. When you started meditating, how cursed were you? When I started, I felt my muscles were in hell, my stomach malfunctioned, and had very bad hiccups. Um, when I first started meditating, it was just a hopeless case. I mean, I just, you know, it's sort of like trying to ride a bucking bronco and getting thrown off after 5 seconds. My mind is really kind of a hyperactive mind, like a lot of Westerners' minds are, I suppose. And so that was the first problem. But I did have sort of karmic, weird things happen. Like right when I became a monk, it was just everything was going wrong. I was getting poison ivy and like viral infections and just allergies and stuff. It was weird. I'd slip and fall and scrape up my side. It was just all these things happening all at once, just at this like this inflection point in my life. And I think that's pretty common. Um, Interestingly, Mary Baker Eddy, in her book on science and health with key to the scriptures, which is like the second Bible for Christian scientists, talks about how if you use Christian science to cure somebody, often they'll get worse before they start getting better. And she called it chemicalization. You know, it's just sort of like this karmic readjustment that, you know, you've got to purge some negativity in order to move up to the next level. And so that can happen. You go to an intensive retreat, and in addition to just the, you know, the screaming pain in your knee or your hip or wherever, or your back. I mean, there just can be all kinds of weird things that happen that, you know, to some degree, it can be like your subconscious mind fighting against becoming enlightened because your ego doesn't want to die or something. But also it can be, like I said, where there's just, you're hitting a karmic inflection point where you've got to purge this negativity that's got to come out through the system before you can move up to the next level of purity or subtlety or whatever it is. So when I first started meditating, the main curse was just not being able to sit still for very long because my mind was so hyperactive. So the next question is from Mary, spelled Merry. And this is an easy one. I can answer this one easy. How tall are you? You seem pretty big. Well, last time I was measured, I'm pretty sure I was 6'3", or about 190 centimeters. For those of you living in barbarous lands that haven't switched over to the feet and inches method yet. So, next question. And now there's a jet plane flying overhead. Next question is from the Arya Swasti Project. And the Arya Swasti Project says, greetings, Punyo. Regarding right view in the Eightfold Path, right action, right speech, etc. are clear instruction to liberation, as they are a cause that will bring about an effect. But right view seems like an effect. How can someone have right view if they are in delusion? It seems to me that this is kind of like telling someone to just go be enlightened. The other directives can be at least attempted in delusion and with mindfulness, but just to have right view doesn't seem possible to even grasp without some level of enlightenment. Warm regards, much respect, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Well, that's a good question. And yeah, I can see the point of this question. I've considered similar things. But really, I mean, the Noble Eightfold Path starts with right view, because right view is just, it's like a map, or like, it's like elementary instructions on how to get going. And, right view just, it's like the Four Noble Truths, a belief, that in karma, that just like, what goes around comes around. That if you do evil, evil will come back to you. That, if you cause suffering, it's going to result in suffering for yourself sooner or later, that kind of a thing. That, you should respect your parents, that kind of a thing. So when it has right view, it's not talking about enlightened right view. And you could argue that there really is no enlightened right view, that when you become enlightened, you don't have any view. You don't cling to any view, that any view that you might endorse as a fully enlightened being is just skillful means. It might be just convenient to get you through samsara, or you're helping somebody else to get started. But right view in terms of the Noble Eightfold Path is just essentially just enough elementary philosophy to get you pointed in the right direction and to inspire you to start practicing. It's not understanding ultimate reality by any stretch of the imagination. So I think I answered that one succinctly. So I'll move on to the next one. Rob495 says, have you ever met any monks who are visibly mentally ill? I haven't met any monks that were just raging lunatics, but I have met some fairly nutty ones, and most of them were not Burmese. There was one that I met that was Vietnamese, and there was another one that I met that was like Chinese Malaysian. And I really don't have, I mean, I'm not trying to badmouth these, I'm just kind of giving them as examples. But like the Chinese Malaysian monk, he would just, twice he did this to me. He would come to my room and then just stand like in the doorway with his back to me. And he was just chronically confused. I don't know if that would count as mental illness, but I mean, he was like too embarrassed or shy to ask me for advice or something. So he'd just come into my room and stand there with his back to me and just wait for me to ask him what he wanted. And then it would be some kind of a wild thing that I couldn't help him with. I met a Vietnamese monk who seemed to be just terrified of lay people. I remember one time he was sitting out in front of his cave eating his lunch, and a layperson came and he just ran into his cave, leaving his bowl of food out in front of the cave, and just stayed in there for the rest of the day. Just hours later, his bowl of food was still out there. He was still hiding. So there are, I mean, monks, I mean, monastic types, I mean, you have to be kind of eccentric anyway. Maybe if you're in a traditional Buddhist country in Asia where it's just the mainstream thing, it's like, every family with a lot of kids wants at least one kid to join the monastery, join the Sangha, that kind of a thing. But for people born into non-Buddhist cultures, then yeah, there's a lot of kind of eccentric types are attracted to it because they're kind of on the fringe anyway. Buddhism is kind of on the fringe. So it does happen. But as I say, I've never met any that were just like completely psycho. They tended to be harmless, harmlessly psychotic at worst. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. Also by Rob495. And he says, and also, what happens to monks who are no longer able to look after themselves? Well, when monks are no longer able to look after themselves, the Sangha looks after them usually. When I was living in a monastery in Upper Burma on the Chindwin River, there was the only other monk who lived there full time with me was pretty old. I mean, he was getting up, when he finally died, he was in his 80s. And he went through a period of sickness where he just went back to the village and lived with some family members who were taking care of him. But if you don't have family members take care of you, then it's the duty of the Sangha to take care of you. And as kind of a side note, it's against the rules of monastic discipline for a monk to write a will or to have a will. It's just that after he dies, his bowl and his robes go to the monk who is tending him in his final illness, and everything else that he owned is just communal property of the Sangha. So I guess the correct answer is what happens to monks who are no longer able to look after themselves is that the Sangha, the brotherhood of monks takes care of their own. Okay, next question is from Arain. And Arain says, Jordan Peterson said, we live in a universe that is characterized by moral dimension, and we understand that well, and that moral failings have consequences, and they are not trivial. They destroy you, they destroy your family, they destroy your community, unquote. How does this universal moral dimension or archetype coalesce with Buddhist ethics? Well, it's pretty much the same as Buddhist ethics, although Buddhist ethics are probably way more subtle than Jordan Peterson's ethics. Just because in Theravada Buddhism, the ethics are so finely tuned, it's almost impossible to do anything that's completely right. There's always going to be a certain amount of unskillful bad karma involved. So just like if you do a good deed, but you believe that you are doing a good deed, then you've got self-view, which is like delusion. And so there's a little bit of delusion mixed in. If that's I am doing this, then already that's delusion and maybe some conceit also. So yeah, this is just basic Buddhist ethics, really. Moral dimension, we understand that well. Moral failings have consequences, and they are not trivial. And moral failings, they can be external or internal. And a lot of people will just assume that morals are external. It's something that you do. It's like if you punch an old lady in the face, you kick a dog, you steal somebody's bicycle, that's bad. But to hate people that do that is okay. But really, it's like anger, hate, just everything, pretty much all of the emotions other than just like selfless love, generosity, benevolence, those are okay. But even benevolence, if it's, I feel love for that person, there's still a little bit of delusion involved because ultimately there's no difference. So, yeah, like there are some groups of people that consistently do reprehensible things from the point of view of Buddhist ethics. Some of these people are Buddhists who do reprehensible things in accordance with orthodox Buddhist ethics. And then there are other people who despise them for that. But the despising also is embracing a moral failure. So yeah, it goes both ways, external and internal. You've got external ethics with regard to your deliberate actions towards others, or just deliberate actions towards not drinking alcohol or whatever it is. And then there's the internal ones of just not wallowing in like negative mental states and that sort of thing. So you have to be really careful. It wasn't until I went to an ayahuasca ceremony ironically, that I realized just the power of a single thought. That is, every kind of thought you have has just this palpable, I mean, it's producing effects just by sitting there thinking it. And I mean, really, it's something not to consider a trivial thing, even though you might be, I don't know, criticizing someone in your heart. And I mean, you're thinking you're not doing any harm because, you're not taking it out on anybody. You're just sitting there thinking it. But still, I mean, internally, I mean, it's sort of like a toxic effect. So, I mean, it's it's really finely tuned, and Buddhism really doesn't pull any punches with regard to that sort of thing. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Gora Gora Gora, who changes his name every week or so. Let's say every 2 weeks. For a while he was Trumptonshire Gahapati. And Gora 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 says, can you recommend something, article length by yourself or another author that summarizes the Buddhist view of ethics and karma as it relates to ethics? Oh, the view of ethics and of karma as it relates to ethics. You have remarked that Buddhist ethics is at odds with Western utilitarian ethics, and I would like to understand the difference better. Well, with regard to stuff that I have written, I assume your best bet would be to find it in this book. Here I am hyping stuff. Buddhist Ethics, Buddhist Practice, which is the third book that I published. Available on Amazon. The link is below. And there are articles in here like, let's see, morality and observances, or accepting responsibility, the ethics of killing, the karma monster, talking about like a general superficial explanation of everyday karma that even a materialist would pretty much have to accept. So yeah, in the older blog that is no longer on the internet, I wrote more just Buddhist philosophy stuff. I am writing more of it now, although the purpose of blog that I've got going now, my second blog, is mainly just political incorrectness, with a Buddhist slant to it. Politically incorrect Buddhism. So let's see, something article linked by yourself or another author that summarizes the Buddhist view of ethics and karma as it relates to ethics. With regard to other authors, I really can't think of anything. I'm sure Ajahn Tanisaro has written on the subject because he's written like 6 gazillion books at this point. Yeah, and the difference between Buddhist ethics and Western utilitarian ethics, yeah, there's obvious just a radical difference between the two, because Western utilitarian ethics is it's like volition. The importance of volition is minimized, or it's just almost irrelevant. There's no karma in Western utilitarian ethics, whereas in Buddhist ethics, it's the whole point of Buddhist ethics, or like what it's based on, is whether it's making you wiser and closer to enlightenment, or more foolish and farther away from enlightenment. I mean, that's like the what do you call it? The litmus test for morality in Buddhism. Is it getting you personally closer to enlightenment or farther away from it? And it really doesn't even matter what the effects are on others. It might be that renouncing the world has your mama in tears because she wanted grandkids really bad. But I mean, it's kind of irrelevant because it depends on your volitions. Of course, your behavior towards your mother, your attitudes toward your mother would be involved in ethics too. But yeah, I'm sorry to hype stuff, but if you wanted something article length by myself that summarizes the Buddhist view of ethics, maybe the article Morality and Observances in this book. Sorry to have to sell something, but gotta put food on the table. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is the last question. And it was asked just as I was sitting down to do this video. The last question just squeaked in. It's like in those action movies when the big metal door's coming down and then like the guy just rolls underneath right before the door comes down. Diane here did that. And Diane says, what are simple everyday things that a layperson can do to get the most benefit? Which is a down to earth kind of question for a person who's living a worldly life. And simple everything, simple everyday things a layperson can do to get the most benefit. Well, I mean, keeping 5 precepts. I mean, having a beer or a glass of wine or something every once in a while. I mean, you're not actually killing anybody by doing that. But with regard to like not lying, not stealing, you got like an insect in your house, you catch it with a cup and a piece of cardboard and let it go outside instead of just squishing it. Um, Being generous, like sharing. If you got more than enough, I mean, that's really a big one in Buddhism. Although, of course, in Buddhism, wise guy monks have got that twisted around into, sharing to giving stuff to the sangha is going to get you into heaven the easiest. But there's a sutta that says even feeding a hungry animal, you're going to get benefit for 100 future lives just from feeding that hungry animal. Just, yeah, just cause more happiness than unhappiness. Just try to have like a positive attitude, I suppose, or at least a neutral one. But I mean, for the standard Buddhist layperson, keeping the 5 precepts, no killing, no stealing, no sensual misconduct, which is, no promiscuity, no, renting prostitutes, no adultery, that kind of a thing. No lying or even like malicious gossip, criticizing people behind their back, bad mouthing people behind their back, that kind of a thing. Or bad mouthing to their face, just letting someone really have it. And finally, the intoxicants, which cause heedlessness or a cloudedness of mind. Just try and keep 5 precepts. Be generous if you've got more than enough. Try to help others if you can. Even just putting bird seed out in your backyard so the little Tweety birds can come and be happy. It's all good. So just yeah, do good, refrain from doing evil. Try to purify your mind as much as you can. That is the teaching of the Buddhas. And also try and learn, read books, watch YouTube videos where somebody who knows what they're talking about is teaching basic dharma, and you might get new ideas for good things to do. And try to have love in your heart. And that's it. That's the last question. And so I advise you, if you want to ask questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, especially if you don't have access to the Discord server or the Subscribe Star account. Just leave them in the comments below, and look at the URL links, and you can find all sorts of things. And be happy.